Welcome, everyone, to the 2024 Tech Home Builder Summit. My name is Brandon Savage. I'm going to be your track host for the course of the next 48 hours. We're going to do introductions of us here on the table first. Again, my name is Brandon Savage. I am from Manhattan, Kansas, also known as the Little Apple. Flew in this morning via Dallas. That's the home of Kansas State University. I actually teach in the business school at K-State, in addition to working for a software company called Vozic AI that uses artificial intelligence and machine learning. We can talk about it another time, but I also like to talk, and I'm going to be asking our panelists over the next 48 hours questions that hopefully you would ask them if you were up here at the table to help you better understand the different topics that we have today. So I'm going to turn the time over to our panelists. We'll start off with Lucas.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Lucas LaFontaine. I'm the Vice President of Business Development of IE Construction. I'm from Sacramento, California. I've been in the renewable energy space going on about 10 years now, specifically focused in the multifamily development space and the commercial energy renewable sector. We're a contractor, right? Cut and dry. We're boots on the ground. We're the labor force in the field. We're the guys helping you understand what solar does on your properties and your facilities. Ultimately answering all those tough questions. What does solar do for us? What are batteries? What are EV chargers? We're your experts in the field. Excited to be here today and help you guys learn how to turn solar into a profit center.
Sean.
My name is Sean Berry. I'm from Vienna, Virginia. A little bit on my background. I started at a company called MicroStrategy. A lot of you that might be aware of Michael Saylor is big into Bitcoin these days, but the reason why I mentioned MicroStrategy is that they were the founder of a company called Alarm.com. And so in my 20s, I worked at MicroStrategy. In my 30s and 40s, worked at Alarm.com. I ran the outside sales team and inside sales team there, as well as expanded into new vertical markets, such as the builder channel, the multifamily channel, healthcare, and even dabbled into insurance and utilities. So our goal there was to help create smart home and smart technology as a standard. And so today I'm general manager of HomeLink. It's a national integrator that brings smart technology to the multifamily space and also a focus with production builders. So we look forward to chatting today about sustainability and some of the things that are taking place that are really cutting edge.
And now we're going to transition to our first topic, our first session of today. And the purpose of today's panel, which is officially titled A Vision for Leveraging Smart Power in Multifamily Properties, is we're going to provide multifamily professionals, you, with a comprehensive understanding of how to effectively implement smart power solutions in your properties. This session aims to move beyond the basic introductions to solar and to smart home technologies and hopefully focus more on the practical strategies and the real-world examples that should resonate with you as an audience of builders, investors, and operators. So with that setting the stage, we've kind of divided what we want to talk about today into four areas. We'd like to talk about the benefits of smart power in multifamily, then talk about some of the challenges of implementation, then how do we pay for it and how do we get people to pay for it, right? The financing and the marketing. And then at the end, we'll spend a few minutes talking about what are some of the future trends beyond some of the great technology we're already seeing in the market today. So let's launch into the benefits. And just going a little bit off script here, if you were to say like in one paragraph, what are the benefits of smart power in multifamily, what would those be? You want to go first, Sean?
Yeah, I think there's green financing that's available, and I think that there's a tremendous opportunity to generate awareness in a segment that is attracted ultimately to those sustainability buildings. So those are the two, inexpensive financing and then also generating more awareness for people.
Okay. Lucas, what's your high view of the benefits?
I mean, ultimately, it's decreasing your operating expenditure, right? Adding renewable energy to ultimately increase your operating cash flow. You're almost future-proofing your property. Cost of electricity continually grows. Technology is continuously changing. We're having to adapt our properties to meet the clientele today, and then also battle the big utilities. So renewable energy and the benefits behind that is greater than most would think.
Okay, so we've got a list of potential benefits, some of which they've mentioned here. We're not going to be able to talk about every single one of these, but this will kind of give us a starting point. So I'm going to launch a specific scripted question to Sean. So in your experience, you know, part of the goal here is that by putting this on your properties, you're going to get people that are going to see that as a value. So how do property owners effectively communicate that sustainability value to be able to attract tenants?
Well, if I kind of reflect back probably 6-7 years ago when the production builders really started picking up on smart technology and started creating awareness, their approach, and the first account I was associated with was actually one of the largest in the nation, D.R. Horton. I worked with Brad Conlon and Adam Dunham over there. And what they essentially did is they created videos and they educated people on the benefits of smart technology. And it went beyond just their website and went into social media. And so I think a lot of these, you know, what we really want to start doing is generating this type of awareness, you know, across the board into sustainability as well. So where today some of these smart gadgets might be commodities inside of a multifamily building from a consumer perspective, sustainability is something that people are really starting to grab hold of. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity to learn more from that.
And then some of the statistics you have on this slide, do you want to speak to?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of ways that we can look at this. One, you know, as you can see with some of these stats here, that there's a big demand there, and you know, renters and the residents are certainly interested in this. And this is actually a great example of maybe a social media quote or something that you can put out there, you know, to promote your building and what you're doing, along with interviews and videos around sustainability. Anything to drive the right tenants to your building. And so there's lots of different things that you can do around white papers, PR statements to drive that awareness. You can have events, you know, early on talking about sustainability and what that means for the tenant and for you as the developer. But then even after they become a tenant of your building, what we've also come across are companies that gamify sustainability inside their buildings themselves, where in the foyer you might see a display of each individual unit that people adhere to and want to participate. And the person that saves the most energy, whether it's through thermostat control or through appliance usage, they just simply gamify the entire building, and then they give out awards. And this is something that I first saw in Phoenix, Arizona. And, you know, that's something that we're starting to see that trend as well. So leveraging this type of data to drive the proper people to the building, and then also gamifying the same data within the building itself. And that's a great trend that we're starting to see in some of these units.
So I mentioned I did grow up just up the road here, up the 101. And whenever I come back to visit my mom and sisters that live in this area, you know, it's always surprising in contrast to where I live in Kansas of how many solar panels are here. And going to different parts of the country and also different parts of the world. And I was in Europe last summer. There's so many solar panels that you see there. And at least in Kansas, one of the arguments, and I know we've got cheaper power there as part of it, but there are certainly some misconceptions when it comes to the total cost of ownership when it comes to smart power. Do either of you want to talk about what are some of those misconceptions that owners have with respect to total cost of ownership?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, similar to what Sean was touching on, it's the adoption of the education piece behind it. But then, like I mentioned before, leveraging your properties and understanding that the cost of energy today is only going to increase, right? If by show of hands, I'm just curious by the audience, who has implemented renewable energy on their properties today? A few? Who's implemented on their personal home? One. So that's a crazy statistic. Just like how Sean and Brandon were saying, is California has adopted that piece because our cost of energy is so expensive here. And as we start to see that trend across the market, we're really hedging the sustainability and renewable energy against the utility grids. And the total cost of ownership, when you look at the lifespan behind solar panels and EVs and batteries on a property, that levelized cost of power is significantly cheaper than it is today or will be 30 years down the road. Just imagine if you bought fuel for the rest of your life 10 years ago. All of us would be happy today. That's kind of the concept behind the sustainability piece.
And on top of that, the cost of the hardware is coming down. Not only is it more efficient, but the total cost of ownership is dropping substantially. So it's making more sense beyond just states like California. But I strongly believe that you're going to start seeing regulations change across the U.S. and you're going to see more standards where it's going to be consistent, not only in multifamily, but also single family. And the benefit of the hardware dropping in cost is part of that as well.
When it came out, solar was a premium. People who had solar on their homes, it was the premium product, the early adopters, just like with any piece of technology that comes out. Remember Blu-rays? Blu-rays were a $500 piece of technology that everyone wanted. You can go buy one at Walmart now for $15. Same thing with the sustainability, the renewable piece. Technology has adapted and become more cost effective.
Earlier in my career, I spent almost 2 decades in the electronic security industry, the ADTs of the world, working at various companies in operations and supply chain. 2010 was working for a company that wanted to leverage, they had a pretty large door knocking sales force and wanted to explore solar. This is before there was a lot of door knocking solar. And when we were looking at the cost per watt to both purchase and install solar, and I've watched that metric over the last 14 years, is that it has just dramatically dropped compared to what it was then. It really confirms what you're saying, is that the time has come to where that it is really matured.
Yeah. Not only that, policies have really had a hand in continuing the sustainability. The IRA has extended tax credits through all multifamily, single-family properties for many, many years. So that's again, as a nation, the push that we can have the sustainability.
Okay, so one of the bullet points up here that might be catching everyone's attention is the ancillary revenue opportunities. Can you speak of how Smart Power can give a multifamily operator the opportunity to make additional revenue?
Yeah, so it's the concept of becoming a utility yourself, right? As a multi-tenant property or even a single family property, as you're ultimately becoming the utility yourself by in that total cost of ownership, hedging against those utilities and having that money pay for yourself, right? You're investing in that technology today that's ultimately has a fixed cost, but over time, you're seeing those profits come back into your own pocket.
And we talked before, you mentioned EV charging stations as one of the opportunities to be able to do that. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
EV charging is a fantastic piece. EV chargers are going to be everywhere before you know it. Right now, policies are pushing it everywhere you go. Single family homes, right? They're pushing EV chargers, multifamily properties pushing EV chargers. It's your clientele. You see more electric vehicles on the road today than you ever have before. And how do you turn that into, yet again, another revenue stream for your property? It's a little bit more difficult on the single family side. It's more of a piece and a way to draw your clientele in. But on the multifamily side, combination of renewable energy, having that lowest cost of power, coupled with an EV charging solution, cost of power 6 cents, you charge the end user 14 cents. The delta between, again, is money in your own pocket.
Just by show of hands of those in the room, how many of you have taken the plunge and have an EV?
Couple.
Couple.
How many of those are Teslas? Oh, only 2.
Oh, look at that. By just show of thumbs, how do you like your EV?
We got 2, 3 thumbs. Who has range anxiety? Nobody. Okay.
I drove a hybrid for almost 15 years and got my first EV about a year ago. I absolutely love it. But to your point, I can see where there's going to be opportunities as it becomes further adoption of figuring out, particularly in the multifamily space, how do you charge? That's going to be a key decision for generation that is going to want to buy EVs. They're going to be looking for a place that has a charger to where they want to have a home.
Absolutely. Like these multi-tenant, multifamily spaces, a lot of them that we see, they also have some retail piece to it, right? Gas stations are where historically everyone has filled up. Gas stations had to be specifically placed in a certain location. EV chargers don't, right? You can have anybody come to your location, charge, and make revenue off of it. They stop, they charge. It is an endless possibility by the EV push.
All right, next up, Sean, what kind of feedback have you heard from tenants and properties that have integrated smart power solutions? How does it impact their rental decision?
Yeah, so we've heard all types of things from, people that do not want to be told what to do with regulations to, hey, this is a tremendous business opportunity where my building can make more money. I think one of our goals personally is always position new technology as a profit center. So not only is it about net operating income and addressing expenses, which I know we'll talk about, but positioning this technology as a profit center. And so we're really excited about the new technologies that are coming out. Even the EV chargers, we talked about solar panels coming down in price, but a lot of the EV chargers themselves have been drastically reduced. And so that just makes it more profitable. And most of the time, most of the things that are installed in most of these buildings need to have an ROI of 3 years or less. And so with EVs, though, it can be in perpetuity with, as you become a utility and you're charging, whether it's a tenant or maybe in some cases, some properties allow you to do things, allowing a third party entering into that space, and you can make additional revenue on those EV chargers, on your property. So very excited about, where that can go. And there's, it's a business decision and a business model.
So I'm curious for those out in the crowd who have started to implement some of this smart power solutions into your properties. Have we overlooked any of the benefits you're experiencing? All right, nice and loud. So to restate, if you didn't hear, he lives in Sacramento. The government, both state, county, city, are providing rebates for this type of technology. Like, they're going to fund it. They want you to get it in there and to strike when that opportunity exists, because it may not always be there, but there are certainly incentives being thrown out there to make the plunge and to add these to your homes. Other questions? This is meant to be interactive. Yes?
And so we're talking about how do you become a utility at your property itself. And that's done by a combination of things. It's having a power source, a power generation source, and that's solar. There's other forms behind it. You have geothermal, there's wind energy, but for the most part, the most cost effective for most properties is solar power. That produces energy that is designed to prevent your meter from spinning forward. The less energy that you're buying from the utility at a very high premium, you ultimately become that utility yourself because you're providing power to yourself, and that can then flow downstream. Prior to being in renewable energy, I was in the multifamily development space, specifically Section 8 tax credit HUD on those multi-tenant properties. And how you split those benefits, it's a combination of a construction, right? Having energy divvied out to certain meters on the property. But then there's also policies in place in most utilities that it's virtual net metering. You interconnect to a single point, and then you distribute those energy credits to your tenants. Those tenants then see a reduction in their cost, and through different billing platforms, you as a property owner, if you take on those utilities or not, you can compensate that within your rental rate. So there's a unique strategy behind that in all forms, from low income to market rate to single family. If you're rent to own, how you can capitalize on that.
Any follow-ups? Does that help?
Great question.
And maybe a tie-in to that, as solar and EV regulations are growing, particularly when we've talked about California, how is that impacting compliance code in California and outside of California?
I have less hair today because of these codes and compliance methods. California specifically was obviously the early adopter, and it's now, as you mentioned, right? Kansas doesn't see a ton of solar, but that adoption is happening. In California specifically, years ago, solar became required as a mandate for every single family property. As of last year, it is now a mandate for multifamily and commercial properties to add renewable energy. They also have changed our net metering policies, which has forced the property owners and developers to become their own utility through not pushing energy back to the grid, storing it at their property through batteries, and isolating that. There's a bigger play from a utility standpoint as we grow and develop, right? We're not building more power plants. We're not building more coal or nuclear or natural gas. We're building a virtual power plant network, what we would call a VPP, to isolate these properties themselves to become a utility. But those policies are pushing on a national basis, from EVs being mandated on properties, solar being mandated, batteries being mandated, to have that sustainability and the grid have less of a demand.
And the halo effect from that is that some of these states are mandating it. It's moving the companies that are producing that technology down the adoption curve and getting economies of scale, which is improving the price for the rest of us.
Yep. So because of that mass adoption, right, you're seeing that curve of costs are having to go down. Incentives are at the highest that you're going to see. And eventually they will run out. But today, with these policies and changes that have happened, you can capitalize on it. You can, in the multifamily and commercial space, about 50% of the cost is through tax credits, incentives, and rebates, if not higher. I've seen projects where 70% of the total cost has been offset through rebates and tax incentives.
Yep. In grants, and the other thing to mention, it's tremendous to see all the manufacturing that is also being done with solar panels and EV right here in the U.S., which is also helping us drive some of that cost down.
A lot in Arizona. Yeah. A lot of manufacturing facilities being built in Arizona and Colorado right now to have that domestic content to lower that cost.
Yep.
Panasonic is building a large manufacturing facility outside of Kansas City for EV batteries. Okay, was there anything we wanted to cover on this slide, or are we good? This one?
I would just simply say, when you think about some of the sustainability initiatives and the demand that you guys are creating for tenants that want that, there is stats and numbers that show an increase in rental rates as well. So that all plays into the overall return on that investment outside of just, grants or government participation, but from a tenant perspective as well.
Then do you have anything on this slide that you wanted to add to?
This just touches on how we went over policies, how commercial multifamily buildings, specifically in California, are required. Other small municipalities like Denver proper is now requiring properties to go solar. You're starting to see this push in smaller networks outside of a state perspective everywhere.
Okay, so we kind of, we'll tie up the benefits into a bow, and let's move on to implementation. So if we're talking to someone here in the room that maybe hasn't taken the plunge yet and they want to start, and perhaps we can talk about where's the best place to start, or what are some of the pitfalls or challenges with implementation. So to maybe kick us off, Lucas, can you walk us through a recent solar installation and some of the hurdles that you have to overcome?
Yeah. I'm going to use California as that because, again, I've lost so much hair because of California policies. There's a specific design methodology that has to go behind. When you look at a multi-tenant property, actually, there's a slide this one. Yeah, we can look at this one. It's a commercial property, but very similar to multi-tenant, right? This is a multi-tenant commercial property where we have to integrate the solar as a whole per building, but then not just a per building basis, but as an entire facility basis. That implementation takes a heavy lift from a design and engineering side to when we talk about total cost of ownership, implementing it in a right way on the front side, and then again, future-proofing this project specifically. This is KTM. It's a large manufacturer of motorcycles, but they are pushing that renewable aspect, the EV aspect. So even though today, when we built this facility, they didn't have EV, we went with their engineering team and we designed to have the future proofing for those EV implementations to sustain. So it's very important to look at this. I have a phrase: we're not just a construction company, we're a tech-struction company. We implement technologies through design and construction to have that future proofing of any type of facility and property.
And when you say EV in a manufacturing facility, you're talking about some of the different vehicles that are moving around within the manufacturing facility, the
forklifts, semi-trucks, even their dirt bikes. Their dirt bikes are going all electric. You see it now, right? Kids nowadays are riding these all electric dirt bikes rather than these gas powered ones. The electrification process is here. It's here to stay, and we have to build the infrastructure for it.
Anything that so as we look at some of the other challenges associated with implementation, Sean, from your perspective, what should multifamily operators prioritize when they're trying to choose the smart devices for an implementation? What are some of the hazards or the things they should be looking for?
Yeah, I think it's really important to think about future proofing with the right technology. So even as something as simple as a smart thermostat, which you can do energy savings programs within a building, or if that unit becomes vacant, the property management software will automatically put that unit in energy savings mode. The point that I wanted to make around future proofing is that a lot of this hardware now actually has software embedded in it. So over the air on a weekly basis, there's updates that get sent out to these hardware components. So, the days of worrying about hardware that, becomes outdated right away, those days are gone. And so a lot of these technologies, you can update the software on there. So, that in particular is a really important point around future proofing. I think the other thing too is that companies make the mistake of going after the shiny objects instead of looking at the end goal of looking at an enterprise dashboard of all the sustainability initiatives and all the moving components within the building itself. And so when you make the decisions on the shiny objects first, not all of those components will communicate with one another. And then you lose the benefit of automation and workflow management, where if you want to run an energy management program, you want things to run concurrently with one another. So enterprise dashboards are very important. You want to standardize on a platform first, and then you work backwards to the objects within that ecosystem that you can future-proof, that gets updated, that works together. A lot of these components, they're called point solutions. They don't necessarily work with other components. And so I think it's really important that if you want to maximize your return on investment, if you want to have a tremendous impact on your net operating expenses as well as income, having that enterprise dashboard is important, not only for you as the developer or owner of the building, but also for the consumer. That consumer's experience is really important. You want them to be talking about their smart property because that's how you get referrals in the door. And that's how the builder market works as well. It's a referral business. And so you want to keep the consumers happy, but at the same time, the same technology can be leveraged in such a way that it makes your building more efficient from an operational perspective as well.
What advice do you give to your partners when it comes to like an enterprise dashboard and picking some of the other devices besides solar that are going to be part of the whole system?
I couldn't emphasize more than what you're saying right now. That enterprise dashboard is the key to that future proofing and sustainability. We talk about demand mitigation, being able to adjust. It is extremely important. Outside of the muddy boots on the roof installing this, it is very important to have those software solutions that have the ability to consistently update, to manage your facilities in a way. And like how you mentioned before, gamifying it, right? We're looking at the end consumer, who are our end customers behind this, and having that interaction with them is extremely important. They want to feel as if they're a part of it. And we do that through software and technologies and apps. That's why we all have smartphones today with hundreds, if not dozens, of apps that we use, because it helps us feel as if we're being a part of it. Yep.
So I can speak to that. A couple months ago, I switched with my local electrical provider to their night and weekend plan. So before I was just paying a constant rate, 24/7, where now there's some incentives in place to limit my usage between 4 and 8 p.m. That's the peak demand in our location. And then in the mornings from midnight to 6 is where it's really cheap. And with my EV, I've now got it set up so that my EVs, once I plug it in, it doesn't charge until midnight, and it will charge between 12 and 6. And that gamification, like I'm on my phone, like going in and looking at exactly what my daily use was and comparing it to previous. So like right now, for instance, when I look at last 12 months ago, my bill was like $160 for the month. I'm on pace this month for $105, and I'm saving, good 30% by being able to understand when I'm using power and realizing that I can kind of control the times that I use it.
Yeah.
How does that play out in multifamily?
It's the same thing. The utility rates, the policies, they're constantly changing. And by having these enterprise dashboards and having that renewable energy aspect behind it, as they change their rate structures, you can then reprogram your system to make sure it's the most efficient, most effective possible. Buying energy from the grid when it's the cheapest form, storing that energy and using it in the most expensive times of the day. Same thing as you're doing right now by switching that rate structure. That rate structure is going to change. It's going to change probably 5, 10 more times in the next 10 years.
Yeah, and based on the rate structure changing, so should your home or your apartment unit. So it's all about data. So data tells a story. And so think about the technology that could take place that will automatically address usage or turn that dryer or that washing machine on, or maybe you won't be able to use it because you programmed it that way to what you're comfortable about. Are you a power user around sustainability, or you're someone that just wants to feel good about it when it's convenient for you? Everyone's different, and that's fine, but these systems have the ability, and I think it's only going to get even more interesting and more customized to the individual user to how far they take sustainability. And that doesn't matter if you're a tenant in a multifamily unit or a single family. You're going to start seeing that take place where data is going to paint that story, and you get to control that story and get to control, what things happen or don't happen within your home.
I think it's fascinating, as you said, that it does change those rates. And those of you that are in California have seen that evolve over the last decade. I'm in Kansas, I'm at the beginning of that cycle where right now there is not a lot of demand in the middle of the night, and that's why they're incentivizing us to use electricity there, where California has moved so far down the curve now with so many solar panels, so many EV adoption. Everyone was charging at night, where that was when the greatest demand was, and now it's flipped. My understanding from my mom is that their cheapest rate right now is in the middle of the day, because there's so much solar, there's so much power, and there's incentives in place for them to not charge their EV at night, because that's when everyone else is charging it, but to charge it during the day. And so you have to have a system and the technology to be flexible as you evolve along that adoption.
Yep. And same on when we talk about EV and the multifamily space, it's understanding that technology and what you should charge, when you should charge it, when they're charging, right? That's an incredibly important piece as this EV market is growing and adapting. We're talking about that demand curve on those market segments, having that piece of technology in place to understand where they are, how you're using that energy, and how you deploy it.
I think this slide talks to enterprise. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would say something to add to this is that even though you're embracing smart technology, it doesn't mean that there's a separate platform that you have to interact with. All these platforms, these smart platforms out there actually interact with your property management software. So what you really need to do is understand what your workflows are and what you want to do with smart technology to impact your operating expenses. Now, could you go into a dashboard like this? Of course you could. But most of the time, we want to set up workflows so that when something happens in your property management software, it interacts through API integrations with your smart platform so things just happen. So a good example of that is when someone moves into the apartment, well, you make that recognition in the property management software, and what happens then? It automatically sets up a code, temporary code for that user. It automatically adjusts the thermostat for that individual based on what their needs were. It automatically sends out an email, and it just gets the unit ready for that person that's moving in, so they feel welcomed. At the same time, when in that same property management system, when it becomes vacant, as I mentioned before, that's when maybe the lights go on a schedule inside, so your building doesn't perhaps look empty. That could be one example, but more importantly, from a cost savings, adjusting that thermostat in energy savings mode. There's been some extreme examples of where thermostats have been adjusted and then no one, goes into that unit for a month or two. And, there's real cost there when you're doing it with multiple units. So you just have these safeguards in place where, you don't have to interact with smart home platforms. You can just automate it, and there's dozens and dozens of workflows that can take place based on the real estate asset type, size building, or the goals of that building in particular. So that's where you can work with your service provider or integrator to go through those details and take advantage of best practices that are out there in the marketplace today.
The HVAC component is really interesting. That's one for me, just on my single house, is like I realized pretty quickly that when I was running the air conditioning during the summer, that's when I saw my biggest days, and I totally changed my schedule in a way that still fit the comfort level, but I was like using the AC really early in the morning, bringing that temperature down when the price was cheap, and then kind of letting it ride the rest of the day, and kind of figured out that right formula where I was just as comfortable as I was before, but I was using the energy in different times. And I'm sure that scales to the multifamily as well. So for those in the room that are either beginning of taking the plunge, what other potential adoption or implementation challenges have you seen that we haven't talked about yet, or questions you have for our experts up here on the stage?
So this particular one that Habitat Metro was the developer in Phoenix, Arizona, that was a customized application that they built out. So that is something that I could research a bit more on existing platforms that are out there. That was Habitat Metro. That it was a customized application that they built out for their properties. Yeah, and so they had a display in their lobby that showed each individual unit and what their savings were, and literally would rank unit numbers. And then the person that was the winner for that month would get a dinner with a local restaurant, which I'm sure was a sponsor. So they offered that no charge, because that location, that restaurant, would also be displayed on that display. Exactly. Yeah.
Kind of a Hall of Fame, Wall of Shame approach.
Yeah. And you could opt out, of course, but
sure.
The point of going into a building like this is that you want to make a difference. You want to feel part of the community. And all this is based on data and API feeds. So there's lots that you can do within a building, and you can adjust it, again, for the real estate type or the goals of the building. Sure, with a lot of these, inside these units, if you want to have a smart unit that controls the locks, the lights, the thermostats, et cetera, you need usually a automation panel. Those automation panels are basically like an iPad. They can be used as an iPad. So you can do push notifications, on that panel as well, whether it's a pizza party or it's a winner for the sustainability of the month. So lots of different things that you can do. And from a communication perspective, inside the unit as well as the lobby display.
Yeah, I think, Sam, you might have a question there in the back. I'll restate the question.
Yeah, so when we're considering adding energy storage, where does it make sense, especially if you're limited on how much solar and renewable energy you can install? That's a great question. And it's going to boil down to your utility. Does the cost delta make sense? Are you experiencing high demand charges? When is that energy being consumed? And is it more cost effective for you to store that energy in your own battery and self-consume it during those peak hours or not? So that's where that energy modeling comes into play to determine if that is a viable possibility. We'll say in California, most properties it is. Outside of California, it's definitely hit or miss.
Yes. Okay, so the question I'll try to restate. The person asking the question is in Oregon, a lot less sun, much more expensive energy, some government requirements in terms of having to install a certain percentage of solar and a certain percentage of EV. How does the math work out?
So it's how we evaluate the property itself. I'll say your most expensive option is to do nothing. Just continue to pay the utility. Their rates are going to go up. How we evaluate how does it make sense versus paying the fee for you is we have an evaluation. We have a full service design and engineering team that takes your electrical load calculations, runs the energy model, takes the estimated solar production specifically based off of your weather data from Salem, right? You said Salem. And then we cross-reference the two to see, does 30% make a dent? More than likely it will. And then that's where it comes into the battery conversation. Is it better for you to take that solar energy and store it and discharge that solar energy through a battery during the peak rates, where your peak rates may be 2 to 3 times more expensive than when you're actually producing solar? There's a lot of data that goes behind this that we help evaluate. Just like Sean's saying, data is king on how you use the energy, when you use it, and how you deploy it. So that's how we can help through that evaluation.
And then I put you on the spot, but do you have customers in Oregon?
I do not have customers today.
Your first one?
We should talk.
And so the answer is, are there some areas and geographies where the math is not going to pencil out, at least yet?
100%. I can't tell you how many conversations we'll spend countless hours with a client evaluating, and then ultimately come to the end and be like, guys, this doesn't make sense for you. And then we walk away. We're not in an industry to force people to do this. It has to make economic sense and it has to make financial sense. And if you're not check marking both of those boxes, then there has to be a bigger reason behind it. You may have a larger corporation that does it just for the feel good, happy, right? We put solar on our buildings, but every property has to turn into a profit center. Otherwise, why are you doing it to begin? Yeah. So then that's where we get into the interesting side of the policies. They're forcing you how to do it, which is why I have less hair today in California, because they forced us to do this, especially on the battery side. Technology and these policies in place haven't really caught up with each other, and we're having to have those difficult conversations with developers. Sorry, the legislation is forcing you to do this. We're going to do our best to help make this make sense for you, and that's how we evaluate it. Now we implement tax credits, rebates through utilities to help pencil that. But I'd love to chat with you after this and see how we can figure out that for your property.
And it's fair to say that when you have that type of evaluation with the company, even though you may say, look, it doesn't make sense now, you're able to draw the line and say, hey, you're at 9 cents right now. As soon as you hit 15 cents, like, pull the trigger.
Green
It
light.
makes sense.
Yep.
And so you at least know where that line is and when it's time jump in.
Because it's only a matter of time before you get to that point. Utilities are consistently going up. Average cost of energy for solar, you're about that 6 to 8 cents a kilowatt hour range, just for solar itself. Now you rate that between the grid and what you're paying for utilities, right? The line in most states, they're at that same level. California, we're 22 to 30, even 40 cents a kilowatt hour. So it makes sense all day, every day. Yep. So it's your net cost for the solar system based over the lifetime of energy production, forecasted energy production, which does include degradation. Solar day 1 is not going to function the same efficiency as it does year 30. So there is a very complex mathematical calculation that I don't even do. There's technology that we use that help us extrapolate that for you guys.
So we were talking beforehand here, and you shared a story of ways that this is incentivized and at a viewpoint that I'd never heard before, where you've got some customers that have some incentives beyond what we've talked about here to put solar into their parking lots. You want to tell that story? Because it blew both of mine and Sean's heads when you told the story.
When you've been in the industry as long as I have, you run across some interesting scenarios. Texas specifically, they get hailstorms. And a lot of other states, they have damage. And who has to get involved when that damage happens? Insurance companies. So when we go to these dealerships who are totaling millions of dollars worth of vehicles 2-3 times a year because of hail damage, the insurance company also incentivizes them to go and lower their yearly premiums by installing solar canopies, right? Just canopies in general, but how do you also turn those canopies into a profit center for yourself? By adding solar and power, becoming your own utility in those scenarios. So there's creative solutions, not just from a government perspective, a utility perspective, but even talking with your insurance companies. If you live in those weather territories where you may see damage to property, having some sort of protection, like solar on roof. Solar does effectively help protect the roof against hailstorms. The solar panel will be the first thing to break rather than the roof itself. So there's cost deltas and risk factors that these insurance companies have calculated to help reduce premiums by adding certain type of technologies.
When he said that the insurance company said, we'd much rather pay to replace the solar panels at $100 a pop than the cars underneath them, it was like the light bulb. It's like, oh my gosh, of course they would.
Yeah.
When oftentimes we get stuck into, why would the insurance company want to, reimburse these solar panels or put this expensive technology on the roof where hail's going to damage it? Well, you put it over your cars, and the insurance company is saying, yes, please do that.
It was pretty eye-opening because usually there's two major components when you think about net operating expenses. One is energy cost and insurance cost. And so we always have tried to look at smart technology to help out with both. And we covered the energy cost today. And then insurance cost is usually tied to water shutoff valves and water sensors and sustainability around that. But to put solar car canopies, in the parking lot is bringing energy. It's addressing both. It's addressing both sustainability and energy savings as well as insurance costs. So
yeah,
pretty incredible use case.
And in the multifamily environment, you now have got shaded parking, you've got the sustainability element, and you're reducing insurance costs and becoming a utility. I mean, you're checking off quite a few boxes that add value.
Yep,
exactly.
So we've already kind of started blending over into our next area of financing and marketing as we look at some of the potential topics when it comes to finance and marketing. I'll pitch it to Lucas again. Can you explain some of the financing models that you found to be most successful in getting multifamily developers kind of on board to start?
It boils down to two simple facts. What is your budget, and what return are you looking for? If you have the funds to pay for it, your ROI is going to be significantly better and faster if you have the ability to pay for it yourself and take advantage of utility rebates, tax incentives on your own. There are construction financing options that you can finance a solar system over a significant period of time that help reduce your operating expenditure day one. And then there's the leases, the PPAs, the power purchase agreement, where you have a third party come in, effectively lease your rooftop from you, and you have a fixed cost for solar that is typically cheaper than what the utility is, and there's no out-of-pocket expense behind that. And in some cases, those lease payments, in most cases, those lease payments are then cheaper for the tenants, and then you can still charge your tenants the delta between your lease payment and what their utility cost would be. So we evaluated in a multi-pronged approach, is understanding your budget, understanding your end goal, and then coupling that with the different financing avenues that there are in the market today, and comboing that with available incentives and rebates.
Is there anyone here who's done some PPAs, who's taken that approach on your properties?
Good, I'm glad. Don't.
Yeah, They're making money off it, so you should be able to make that money off it.
That goes back to the whole entire aspect of becoming your own utility.
Yep.
A power purchase provider is a utility. That's what they are. They're just a financing arm of being that utility, and they're profiting off of it. I have REITs that we work with on a national basis that have turned their properties into that utility. They are powering the tenants themselves. Most of them are triple net. They're offering a PPA to their tenants, right? They have become the PPA provider and financed it themselves. So it's all this aspect of future-proofing and becoming your own utility.
Any other financing models you want to speak to?
Well, the one that we've been associated with this year, and it's a model that just got released after a couple of years of effort and just got released last quarter, it's more tied to investment grade credit sponsors. So you have these large Fortune 1000 companies that typically have B-rated bonds or higher, and they have ESG initiatives that they need to address. So by being a credit sponsor, it unlocks our ability to get 100% loan to cost of that entire building. So not only the sustainability that we're talking about and the EV chargers, the smart components, but the entire building. And it's sub 10%. So you're not giving up ownership of the buildings with some of the traditional aspects out there. But what's great about this is that because it's associated with sustainability buildings, solar, EV, and so on, this green financing is unlocked for the consumer. And the great thing is, or not for the consumer, but for the developer. And the great thing is that once you have an enterprise dashboard of a safe and secure and sustainable building, there's exit strategies with other large entities in the corporate world that need these ESG properties to meet some of their regulations. So lots of different finance strategies that are out there today, but that's a creative one using a credit letter.
Okay. So talked about how you can get it financed. Then we want to make sure that we're marketing this to, potential renters. What advice do you have on that?
Well, as I mentioned before, I think it's really important to be vocal about it. I think that you could get very aggressive in social media and video usage. But then, in this particular example here, and this is more tied to specifically HomeLink, because HomeLink, you guys might be familiar with the name outside of today's presentation, but HomeLink is the 3 push button in your visor or in your rear view mirror that opens up your garage door. Been around for 30 years and over 110 million people use it. I think roughly 11 million are added each year. But I represent the real estate component of HomeLink, so making smart buildings and smart real estate assets. Well, there's some really interesting partnerships that can be developed in the future where HomeLink is connected to 90% of the car manufacturers out there. So that little push button, imagine it lights up an EV network where you could pull your electric vehicle in. And a lot of these car manufacturers are highly interested in multifamily. So that's a piece of real estate that they see lots of EV chargers going in. Not available for all properties, of course, but is something that we have the ability to create a whole nother network of EV chargers that can be connected by a touch of a button, go to your property. You can make additional revenue from third-party consumers. And of course, that might be an opportunity going back to trying to fill up any kind of vacancy. There might be a QR code that pops up that they can learn more about your particular building that they're charging at. And then that's when you can even tie in, perhaps a unit on the first floor that they can visit and do self-guided tour technology, which is tied to all this, to walk into the unit and see a sustainable unit. And so you see how this, circle is developed from simply a touch of a button, the EV network, more funding, and then showing your building to the right consumers that you might be interested in. So lots of creative partnerships that will create awareness for future tenants for you is what I think the future holds.
Yeah.
Other questions on financing, marketing? And so to restate, that was if for those that are a REIT structure that you can't necessarily take advantage of those rebates, but there's a market out there where those rebates have dollar value. So even if you can't use them, you can still get cash value for them.
Yeah, to touch on that as well. That's why I emphasize don't necessarily always fall into the trap of a power purchase provider. Like they'll give you 10 cents on the dollar. There's a market out there for tax equity partners that'll give you 30 cents on the dollar, sometimes 25 cents on the dollar. Finding the best ways to monetize your investment into renewable energy to the best way possible that makes sense for you is extremely important. So that's, again, circling back to becoming your own utility and finding the best way to take advantage of that.
Okay, we're on the home stretch as we look at future trends. What are some things that maybe aren't happening yet, but that you see as you're looking 2 years, 5 years, 10 years into the future that are exciting you about smart power?
Well, I would say that start with the design first. I've been very surprised working with developers that have architects that will put in the smart gadgets and some of the sustainability components, and they don't, all work together. So I think a big trend that we're starting to see is actually doing the design work on the front end that incorporates an enterprise dashboard with the sustainability projects on the front end. But getting ahead of it is definitely a future trend that we're starting to see, and we're trying to create more awareness around that as well. And I think that's really important to get the most value out of this technology and position yourself that will ultimately impact the operating expenses as well.
So we have members in the audience who maybe want to take that plunge, saying, "Hey, I'd love to talk to an architect who has that kind of vision in mind." You can connect them with some that are doing that already.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of our goal is we're actually reaching out to architects directly as well and creating that general awareness. So like imagine with architect plans, as you guys know, it's usually a Revit or a BIM file. When you want to incorporate some of the technology that we talked about today into an architecture plan, imagine a QR code of every single component, whether it's a camera or an access control or solar, EV charger. There's on the architecture plan, it should be specified, and you need to make sure that all these components work together as well. So that's the benefit of having it done on the front end. And then when you scan the QR code, it gives you the specs of every single product that's within that building, and there can be a further explanation of how all these things work together and tie together.
Lucas, future trends.
I mean, solar's been here for a long time, and the technology is continuously changing, becoming more and more efficient. I'm personally excited to see these virtual power plants, these microgrids start to create themselves through renewable energy and batteries on every facility possible. So it's really interesting how that is being implemented. Not only that, EV charging. I have an electric vehicle. Being able to charge it within 5 minutes rather than 30 minutes is exciting to me. So we're getting there.
The battery technology, what do you think that's going to look like in 5 or 10 years? Is it going to be dramatically different? Do we still have a lot of room to optimize and be more efficient in that side of things?
Even in the last 5 years, we've tripled capacities in a similar form factor and reduced costs by 70%. It's outrageous where battery technology has come today. As more and more EVs are being built, battery technologies are changing and the costs is being driven down.
I think it's Hyundai who's talking about some solid state battery technology that they're going to deploy in 28, I think, that's supposed to be twice or 3 times as fast.
Yep.
How fast it can charge.
Toyota, I mean, we can talk about implementation of hydrogen energy. That's always interesting. We did a study in SoCal Edison, hydrogen energy in combination with battery and solar, and it's highly efficient. So we're going to see a lot more of that renewable energy push into residential and multifamilies.
Okay, any last words you would give to our audience?
Yeah, and, don't be afraid. Take the deep dive. It is a challenge. The cost scares a lot of people away, but talking to the right partner, talking to a company like myself to help you really take the education piece behind this on implementing it can save you hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars.
And I would say, don't get hung up on point solutions. Look at the big picture, really understand the roadmap of some of these hardware and software components, and understand the management, understand their technology roadmap as well, and make sure that that matches up to what your goals are for your portfolios as well.
And you're both here for the rest of the conference, so take the opportunity to find them if they're not already meeting with you in boardroom meetings. We're grateful that you're here. Hopefully this first session was valuable for you. Please give a round of applause for our panelists today.